friends and I graduated from college, we decided we wanted to go somewhere where we could make a difference. Much to our mother's dismay, we looked for places that had high crime, high foreclosure, high unemployment, because we really believed that going somewhere and being good neighbors could transform a community. We looked all over. We did lots of assessments. We read lots of census data and really bored people with the new facts that we had learned about every city that we were considering. Eventually, we ended up in the Detroit area in Pontiac, Michigan, which is a northwest suburb. We bought a house in a neighborhood and moved in. And as we moved in, bright-eyed and excited, we realized the house we just bought doesn't have any plumbing. Oh no. It had been stolen. It had been ripped out and scrapped for a couple of bucks at a scrapyard somewhere. And so, armed with YouTube and plenty of other people to call and give me advice, I decided I was going to fix it by myself. And so I went to Home Depot and I bought all the things, and I was bringing the things into my house, and I had a neighbor who was sitting on his porch, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I have to fix the plumbing. The plumbing is missing." And he says, "Oh, I did that." I said, "Great, do you want to help me put it back?" And he said, "Sure." And so my neighbor Berto and I became friends as we were replumbing my house. He wasn't terribly helpful. He was more of a removal artist than an installation guy. But I got to ask Berto all the questions that I had about the neighborhood. How long have you been here? You know, what's going on? What are the good things about the neighborhood? Where do your kids go to school? What are the schools like? And as we built a relationship and built a friendship, he kind of clued us in on a couple of things that were going on in the neighborhood. And we realized that there was an issue in our community of food, that the access to healthy food was very difficult to come by. A lot of our neighbors don't have cars. The nearest grocery store is a mile and a half away, and depending on who owns it at the time, it may or may not even have a produce section. So we started growing community gardens. In my neighborhood, you can buy a vacant lot for $10. And so we started converting these into community gardens and selling food and teaching people how to grow their own food and how to cook new food that they had not had in generations, and sort of reintroducing food into our community. And as we were beginning this work, we kind of had this idea that we were the good guys, that we were going to be coming in, that we were going to be making a difference, that we were going to be restoring communities and helping families and feeding people who didn't have access to food, and that if we were the good guys, then there must be bad guys. And if we had to figure out who the bad guys were, or if we had to make an assumption that who would be against the kind of work that we were doing, we thought it would probably be our neighborhood drug dealers, of which there are many. Because if there's anybody who would be working against us, it would probably be the drug element. And this was the assumption that we had going into a lot of the different work that we were doing. Eventually, one day, this started breaking down when we bought a vacant lot to plant apple trees on. And as we are planting apple trees with a group of our friends, we realized that the house next to our lot is a drug house. The guy who lives there is running out to a different car every 15 minutes, dropping something off at the window, going back in, and this goes on all morning long. Eventually he comes over and he says, "What are you guys doing?" And he was very large and well tattooed. And I said, "Hello, sir. I'm Coleman. We are just planting apple trees because we want the neighborhood to be better." And he says, "These are apple trees." And I said, "Yes." And he says, "I effing love apples." Okay, not the response I expected. And so he goes on and he says, "I will watch this. No one will mess with this. I will protect it. It's mine. It's yours. We got this." Okay. All right. So we find out his name is Big T. He has two sons, Little T and Kadari. And anytime I go over there to take care of those trees, I have to bring extra tools because Little T and Kadari are in, and they're on, and they're working with me, and they're watering. Big T would mow the lot. Big T watered the trees. One time I showed up and one of our trees had been pulled out of the ground, and I said, "Big T, what happened to this tree?" And he says, "Do you really want to know?" I said, "Nope." He goes, "Okay." And that was the end of that conversation. So he watched after our trees, and his kids got super involved and plugged into everything that we were doing. We'd have neighborhood soccer games, and his kids were there. We had neighborhood barbecues, and he was there. One time I was at one of these neighborhood barbecues, and somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Coleman, Big Leonard is looking for you. If you're a drug dealer, your name's Big. Big whatever. Doesn't matter, your first name's Big. So Big Leonard is looking for you, and I found Big Leonard, and he reached out his hand, and he shook my hand, and he palmed me $1,000, which up until a year ago was the largest donation that anybody had ever made to our organization. And I said, what is this? And he says, I want to help you keep these going. And I said, okay, well, we need to have a conversation because I know what you do for a living. And while I'm very grateful, I can't have you using these as networking opportunities for your small business. And he said, no, like people talk about block parties and people talk about neighborhood barbecues and bringing the neighborhood together and no one does it. And you're actually doing it. And I just want to help you keep that going. And it was conversations and interactions like these where we started realizing that we had sort of drawn this line in the sand between us and these people in our neighborhood who were selling drugs. And we began to realize that when we talk to them and we get to know them and we get plugged into their lives and their family, that they don't see that line, that line is not real to them, that somebody coming to improve the neighborhood means that somebody is helping improve the neighborhood for their kids and for them and for their friends and for the people who live around them. And so we started realizing that our drug dealers, our neighborhood drug dealers, were great allies in the work that we were doing. And we started figuring out a couple of things. One, that our drug dealers are often the most stable neighbors that we have in our community. When we moved in, we figured out turnover in our neighborhood is every 5 months. That because of losing a job, because of losing transportation, because of some issues, a lot of people have problems with continuity of rent and staying in their rental units. Our drug dealers have consistent income. They're paying for their apartments. They're paying for their transportation. They're doing all the things that keep them in the neighborhood longer. And so they know teachers and cops and the schools and the city and the politicians and who's moving in and who's moving out, that oftentimes our neighbors who are drug dealers knew more about the neighborhood than we did because they had been there longer than anyone else. And there was a lot of institutional and community knowledge in the people that we had originally thought we weren't going to be associating with and that we'd even be working against. The other thing we figured out is that our neighborhood drug dealers are taking care of people. We realized this through our friend Jeremiah. Jeremiah runs drugs from one end of my neighborhood to another. He's just walking all day long. If this guy wore a Fitbit, he would destroy a step count. He's working all the time. And so we sat down with Jeremiah one day, and I know that my street is not on his route, that it would be more efficient for him to go another block up and over. And so we sat down one day, and I said, hey, I know what you're doing, and I know that my house isn't on your route. Why do you walk past my house all the time? And he said, well, this street is now the safest street in the neighborhood, that I have friends on this street now because I've met them at neighborhood barbecues and things like that. Why wouldn't I walk down the safest street? And we said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And when we started getting to know Jeremiah and hearing his story, he told us he dropped out of school in 7th grade because his mother was diagnosed with diabetes and had a lot of issues, needed help paying for her medication. And he was just kind of a kid on the street. He knew some of the dealers, and so he started running drugs for money to help his mom pay for her medication. And that's kind of how Jeremiah got wrapped up into this work. And this is also the only job that allows him to be at home in the morning for his little brother to get on the bus, because he wants to make sure that his little brother finishes high school even though he didn't get to. And that's what Jeremiah does. And we figured out that he's running drugs and taking care of his mom, but he's also buying groceries for 2 other people in the neighborhood. And that he's keeping an eye out on this kid over here who's getting on the bus in the morning, and he knows when this kid over here isn't getting on the bus because he's giving them as hard of a time about graduating as he's given his little brother. That a lot of times our neighborhood drug dealers understand that because they have means, they also have responsibility, and that they're taking care of the people who live in our community. The other thing that we love about our neighborhood drug dealers is that they are pretty close to the people that we feel like we are there to serve. And that if anybody's having a hard time paying bills, if anybody's having a hard time buying groceries, if anybody has just had a dad walk out, if anybody has any sort of issues with their cars, that our neighborhood drug dealers know, because oftentimes those people are also buying drugs from our drug dealers. And they can call us and say, hey, Coleman, go check on Gwen. Nobody's seen her in a couple days. Hey, Coleman, this woman over here can't afford groceries. Or, hey, Coleman, I just saw an eviction notice on this person's door over here. You might want to give them a call and see if everything's okay. That our drug dealers are often at street level and know the people in our community well enough to refer to them to us and to call us when they know somebody needs help. And we did not expect that when we moved into the neighborhood. The other thing that it's good to know about drug dealers and why it's good to work with them is because at their core, who they are and what they're doing is they're entrepreneurs. It's maybe not a trade that we all admire or seek our kids to have one day, but they are managing stock, they're doing customer relations, they are developing a base of clientele, they're keeping those people happy, and that if you ever gave them an opportunity to have a legitimate business, they would be amazing at it because they already have the tools. And we're seeing that in our community with a lot of the folks who are doing amazing things right now. And if you get into their past and you talk to them about who they were and what they came from, they one time were slinging drugs. There's a gym in our city called Max Out Fitness. It's run by a guy named Max Main, who gave me permission to tell his story tonight. Max got in trouble for selling drugs and went to prison for a while. While he was in prison, he had a mindset change. And he said, I've got a lot of skills, I've got a lot of tools. I was a really great drug dealer, but I think that I could do legitimate business better. He got out of jail, he had a 420 credit score, and he said, I want to run a business, and no one would give him money to do it. And so he started a workout group that met in public parks. And he grew that workout group to a client base that opened a gym, and now over 200 people in our city are members of his gym that he's their personal trainer. And he'll tell you that it is a lot of the same skills that he learned on the street are what make his gym his gym. And people can't get enough access to Max, and he's running an amazing business right now that's outgrowing its second space as a personal trainer. We've got other guys in our city who are doing great things in government. We got a lot of guys in our city who, just given a couple of tools and a couple of things in their direction, are really taking those skills that they learned on the street and becoming amazing neighbors and amazing leaders in our community. They just have to be given a chance. And so I think that one of the things that we learned is that there is no line in the sand between us and them, and that the pursuit of a better neighborhood is something that everyone is after, because everybody wants a safer place for their kids to play. They want a place where they can work. They want a place where they can make a difference. And we didn't expect that when we moved in, but it's something we learned along the way. Thank you.